The NFL Combine is here, and the Bengals have a lot to get done. Let's break down the Combine to-do list and what we hope to learn about the Bengals this week.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day in the #1 sports podcast network in the land. He's James Rapien, I'm Jake Liscow. We are a Locked On Bengals covering your favorite team, going all the way back to 2016, your best one-stop shop for all things Bengals. And, well, we're gearing up for the NFL Combine. James is getting ready to pack a bag and head to Indianapolis and talk to the coaches and find out what's going on in Indy, boots on the ground. But today we will preview what we're hoping to learn about the Bengals this week, what we're hoping the Bengals get done this week, in addition to all of their prospect meetings and watching how these guys move on the field in Indianapolis. The Bengals movers and shakers have some moves and shaking to do, as they have quite a bit to get done this week, James, and what has so far been a quiet couple of weeks here since the season ended. I guess several weeks, or however you want to say it, since the season ended for the Bengals. Some big decisions, franchise tag deadline coming up in a couple of weeks here for Trey Hendrickson that will be impacted, I'm sure, by conversations they have in Indianapolis this week. And maybe that's where we start. And we've obviously talked about this a lot, but one of the top two items, depending on the order you want to put these in, on the Bengals to-do list this week has got to be around figuring out, okay, can we figure out a trade partner for Trey Hendrickson and get this thing done quickly? That's got to be, I think it's priority number one, James. What do you think?
Well, yeah, that's priority number one. A close second is just going to be getting a feel for what the market's going to be for all of the guys that they need to add to their roster, because they need to add multiple starting players to their roster. And I think that's it. And with Trey, it's over. Like, he's not coming back. I can confidently say that. I think we all know that. And so can they get something for him? Well, the answer is yes. They can. 100% can. But they're going to have to jump through some hoops and communicate. And by now, I would have already told Trey, hey, we're tagging you. Hey, Harold, we're tagging your client. We understand. Doesn't mean you officially do it. You tag him. You let him know, you keep that communication in line. And I think that's a big part of this week, is seeing what you can potentially get for Trey Hendrickson, if it's worth any potential headaches that could come and drama that could come over the next week and a half or so, negotiating this and getting it done, because Trey knows he's the #1 free agent on all of these lists. Trey knows what we talked about last week, the 3 years, $99 million contract that he's projected, according to The Athletic, could certainly get more than that if he hits free agency. And so he's not going to want to get tagged. So communication is going to be big here. But if you're the Bengals, a third or a fourth round pick, that's valuable. That can help you and go a long way, whether it's on the trade market or certainly in the draft, to add to your team, to bolster your team and address one of the many weaknesses or areas that we think they should be open to addressing in the first 4 or 5 rounds of this year's draft.
And they can figure out whether or not they want to use the tag and invite all that drama based on their conversations this week. They have until, like I said, early March to get that tag done. It's March 3rd, right? Is the franchise tag
March 3rd.
deadline?
Yep.
Big date for Bengals big men. Also, shout out Willie Anderson, the transplant we talked about that day. But for Trey Hendrickson, the Bengals can figure out during this week whether or not they need to use a tag, because they will have had those conversations and have a plan. And if they're going to use a tag, then they can do that communication piece and say, hey, Trey, we've figured out a trade partner. Don't worry about this tag. You sign this thing, we'll get you shipped off to XYZ team. And hopefully they will have, done the requisite communication steps to let Harold Lewis, Trey Hendrickson's agent, negotiate the contract and all those things. Because like you said, we're kind of past the point of considering the Bengals keeping him, despite what we think they should do or could have considered last year doing. That bridge continues to appear to be burned by all accounts, and there is no reconstruction effort underway. So something we've certainly talked about for the everydayers, but now it's here. Now this is the week where you can have those conversations, get that ball rolling. And like you said, James, start to figure out what the market looks like for these other positions that they need to make some moves at. And I think it'll be competitive for edge rushers. There's only a handful available. Everybody in the NFL wants them. There's going to be a whole arms race for Trey Hendrickson, a whole bidding war for Trey Hendrickson if he gets to free agency, which is, again, why you would consider the tag and trade. The everydayers have heard us talk about this for weeks now, and we'll see what happens in that area. But the other thing, like you said, is determining what exactly the market will be for linebackers, for safeties, for defensive tackles if they're so interested. Do they want to go find another slot corner? And what I was thinking of at the beginning of the show when I said one of the top two things, I was thinking about Dalton Risner and potentially getting ahead of that this week, getting ahead of the pending free agency for Dalton Risner. Well, certainly fits into the conversation as far as positions and players they need to assess the markets for this week.
Yeah, I think this is where you can really lay the groundwork, because Risner wants to get paid. He's just like Trey. He's just like anybody. Wants to get paid. And he also wants to return. And so let's get an idea of what the market looks like. I know for a fact he wants to return. I believe the Bengals are going to meet with his representatives this week. And they're going to meet with a lot of people this week. Like that's what I think is really important here is you can start to lay that foundation. So when you do circle back before the legal tampering period begins, which I believe is March 9th, right? Yeah, March 9th. It's 6 days after the franchise tag window closes. And so Monday, March 9th, you circle back. And long before that, you have a deal in place. This needs to be the Mike Gesicki situation where you don't let Risner get to free agency and he's valuable to your quarterbacks, similar to Mike Gesicki in that way. And he's going to solidify your offensive front. I mean, that's it. And so can they get it done? Absolutely. Hopefully it's a multi-year deal where it's not a direct cap hit. I know he wants a multi-year deal. And so hopefully they can find out. But can you imagine if this week, here's how big it could be, Jake. In an ideal world, you would have the framework close to in place, or you'd make great progress on a Risner deal that ultimately leads to a deal. And I don't think it's going to happen on Wednesday where they get a deal done, but you can lay the framework this week and lay the framework for a trade. In 2 weeks from now, what if we're talking about Dalton Risner signed and going into the legal tampering period where you already have a pick in play for Trey? Like that would be such a good feeling to have your starting right guard. And then also you look at it and you say, oh, well, we have this extra third round pick to use. That would be great. So we'll see if they can get those things done. Those aren't the only things that need to be done. It's a big, big week for the Cincinnati Bengals, and we'll continue the conversation coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Home Chef. As the new year gets going, a lot of people are trying to simplify their routines. And, well, dinner is a big one. And I get it. You get it. A lot of people get it between work days, cold winter nights, packed schedules, snow again. And it snowed on Sunday. I don't know what's going on with the weather, but that's what happens here in Cincinnati, apparently. Having an easy, reliable dinner plan, it makes a huge difference. And that's where Home Chef comes in. Home Chef takes the stress out of cooking by delivering fresh, pre-portioned ingredients right to your door, easy-to-follow recipes, and meals come ready to fit your schedule. Maybe you want a 30-minute recipe or an oven-ready recipe where it's literally a tray that you put in the oven, perfect for the family, of course. Quick lunches, they have all of those things. Over 30 weekly options with Home Chef. Save time and money. Home Chef customers save an average of $86 per month on groceries. And for a limited time, Home Chef is offering Locked On Bengals listeners 50% off your first box and free shipping and free dessert for life. All you have to do is go to homechef.com/lockedon. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. You must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert.
James, another thing that I think a lot of Bengals fans are looking for this week is the tangible result of what these interviews with the coordinators, with Zac Taylor, with Duke Tobin produce, as far as telling us the things that you can read between the lines and telling us what the intent of this team is going to be this offseason. I'm sure they'll be asked about Trey Hendrickson. I'm sure they'll be asked about Dalton Risner. I'm sure they'll be asked about potential extension candidates. And I'm thinking about Zac Taylor and Duke Tobin's podiums and local media scrums when I think about those questions. But then I'm going to be very interested to hear personally if Al Golden is asked about the identity of the defense and where he sees these linebackers fitting in the future and what he sees as the priorities for improvement for his unit in 2026. And so the Al Golden interview will certainly be interesting. And as far as the offense, I think the thing that we're always interested in hearing about from the offensive side of the ball, James, is going to be about continued evolution and finding ways to continue to move the ball and move the approach forward on offense and find ways to keep up with the times where the Bengals still are, despite adjustments they made that we are very appreciative of and we've talked about, still lagging behind the NFL in things like play action rate, under center rate, motion rate, and down grouped with a bunch of offenses that aren't very good. And because the Bengals have Joe Burrow, they're able to still be a really good offense, but continuing to find ways to evolve. And we saw the run game evolve last year. So there are questions really all over the place here, James. And what do you think the most interesting or important question to get answered from the Bengals brass will be as you're talking with them in Indianapolis?
Well, I think any morsel that they give out about their plan in free agency is big. And I know for a fact in that building, there are people that know how significant free agency, obviously the draft is huge too, but how significant free agency is. And there are people in that building expecting the Bengals, I'm not talking players, to add significant pieces in free agency. And so how much do they give us from we would really, they're not going to come out and say it, but I always go back to this because it's literally how it played out. A couple of years ago, they mentioned the idea of signing a veteran offensive tackle and drafting one. And they did that. They go get Trent Brown and Amarius Mims within a month and a half of each other. And that's what Duke Tobin said. And I remember in the moment, my eyebrow raised. And at the time, we thought of Mekhi Becton, the Frank Pollock connection, and they bring Becton in. It didn't work out. And so then they get a deal done with Trent Brown. But yeah, like that, those are the type of things that I'm always interested in. And given how important free agency is for this team, because of the massive expectations, and they're massive, with the gigantic holes. I mean, it's a very unique spot. There aren't many 6-11 teams where everyone's going to be like, hey, you better be in position to make a deep playoff run. Like it's very unique in that way. And it's because they have Joe Burrow. You're right. It's because he can cover up some of those flaws that there are on offense, so much so that people think the offense is fine. And there's plenty of things they could do better on offense. And so that's it. I think they're aware, to go back to what I said about people in the building, they're aware of how much they need to do and the talent they need to add. And so what breadcrumbs do we get that on record that tell us that? I think that's a really interesting thing because they're in a really unique position where coaches fired if they don't get it right this offseason and win next year. The front office, Duke Tobin talking in person in Cincinnati at the end of the season. Like, I think they know. I think they know that there's a lot of pressure and they have to figure this out with Joe Burrow in the building and having missed the playoffs in 3 straight seasons.
Jason Fitzgerald from Over the Cap just put together a chart of NFL free agent spending from 2020 to 2025. He put that out on Sunday. The Bengals coming in at 22nd in free agents signed in the last, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 20, last 6 years, because that's how math works. They've signed 24 free agents in the last 6 years. So tied with the Cardinals at 21st, 22nd in the NFL. They have spent, interestingly, I think, a higher than average dollar per free agent number than a lot of teams around the NFL, coming in, I think, near the top 12 at $7 million per free agent. So they're spending a little bit more money than some of the teams around them on fewer players. So that I found interesting. I was a little bit surprised that was the case, that they have gone more toward the higher price range, because we know they don't touch the premier price guys, right? Which means they're spending more like high middle class free agents instead of taking a more scattershot approach. For example, like the Houston Texans, who have signed a league leading 59 free agents in that period of time, or even the New England Patriots, who have signed 39 free agents in that period of time. So the Seattle Seahawks, the Super Bowl champions, at 33 free agents in that period of time. So that's 9 more than the Bengals 24. So just interesting little pieces of information there where we find that the Bengals aren't the least active team in free agency in recent history. And we obviously know the years that they were more active and found those foundational pieces in the past. They have to go back to that approach. They have to go back to finding those cornerstone players that they can build this defense around, bring in that veteran leadership that they did in the past, where they had the guys that could lead by example and execute the defense the way it needed to be executed. Specifically on the defensive side of the ball, we're talking about the same thing here. That's the task ahead, and it'll be interesting to hear what the sound bites are from Duke Tobin last year, because one he's still not lived down, James, is I don't want to pay more money for the same team. Yeah. And despite all the tidbits that we think we do get from Duke Tobin, fans remember that quote more than anything else.
And by the way, did he get screwed over by ownership with that quote? Did they say there's not more in the budget? I don't know. Like, that's what's so interesting about it. I do know that they're aware now. And you just have to, I think there's an argument that could be made that, they clearly just didn't have enough talent. And so you got to bring back Al, and you got to bring back Zach and everybody that we're going to hear from this week. Fine. Well, you can't keep running it back the same without adding more talent, so you can see if they can make it work, if they can get back to where they were a few years ago and beyond. Because a reminder, they still haven't done it. Still haven't done what they set out to do and what they're going to set out to do each and every year. And you got to, there's only one team that's holding the trophy at the end, and they've never done that in franchise history. And so pushing more so to where they're uncomfortable is something that they need to do. I think about Trey. Trey's going to dominate this week. When Carl Lawson agreed to his deal with the Jets, I believe Bengals ownership was the one that kind of pushed that Trey Hendrickson deal, that initial 4-year, $60 million deal across. And I don't know if it was an extra year. I don't know if it was a little extra month. I don't know what it was, but Trey was weighing multiple offers. And then boom, they push that across, and it goes down as the best free agent signing in team history. What a game-changing move. They need multiple game-changing moves like that in free agency, where they find these starters, these plug-and-play guys that are going to be significant contributors. So we'll see if they can do that. We'll also see which players stand out the most at the combine. And that's what's funny. To you and me, Jake, I think the player side kind of goes towards the back end of the week and into next weekend. But a lot of people thinking about players now. We'll discuss some of the players we'll have an eye on in Indianapolis coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. I would love to experience an NBA Finals in person. And if you want to experience an NBA Finals in person, well, you can. FanDuel is giving you a chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. You use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two that includes flight, tickets, the whole package, the whole experience. And maybe you're already thinking about who's going to win it all. You think Oklahoma City's going to roll, or maybe Wemby and the Spurs are going to get hot and take down the defending champs. Doesn't matter. Futures this time of year, whether it's picking a team to win a championship, conference title, it adds an extra layer of excitement to every single game down the stretch. By the way, the Cavaliers rolling since James Harden got to town. So we'll see if they can be in the mix there in the Eastern Conference. Regardless, all you have to do to enter is visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. That's FanDuel.com. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
The combine is fascinating every year because it's part of this cycle we have in the NFL where in January we think that the draft is going to play out a certain way. And then we go through the pro days and the combine and the championship games, and a whole lot of narratives get spun as people are more and more transitioning. The people who cover the NFL transition. They start watching college guys. And not talking about the Dane Bruglers of the world, but those guys are also updating their boards with their end of season notes, their last conversations with coaches, the way players finish the year. And so one of the players that immediately comes to mind when you have that conversation is going to be Peter Woods for me. Peter Woods, who, if you asked us a couple months ago, was the default, like, yeah, that guy makes a lot of sense at 10. I think if you asked us in early January, maybe a month ago, it was a lot of thought around, Peter Woods is probably the most likely solution for the Bengals at 10, because probably these edge rushers are gone. Probably the premium talent at other positions that the Bengals might want to target isn't available. So Peter Downs is a good combination of a team need and a player that
Peter Downs. Let's go. Get them both.
Peter
Woods and Caleb Downs, baby.
A good combination of need and value. But now Peter Woods is seen as back of the first round player for now. And we'll see how that changes over the next month. And we'll see how that changes this week, because Woods, I believe, was on Bruce Feldman's freak list. He puts out his freakiest athletes of the college game every year. So the first guy that comes to mind for me with the combine is undoubtedly Peter Woods. Caleb Downs is also up there, just because I'm curious to see what he weighs and measures and how he moves in all those tests, because I think it's interesting at safety. It could elevate his potential a little bit more if he's also an elite athlete and also has all the on tape qualities that you see. I don't know that people are necessarily expecting Downs to go test like Nick Eamon-Worry last year, for example. But yeah, first in mind for me, Peter Woods, James, and seeing if he starts to rehabilitate his draft status, if he goes out and tests really well and puts himself back into the first half of the first round conversation.
Yeah, it's a really big one, because there are a lot of arguments for him. There are a lot of arguments against him. I just pulled up Lance Zierlein's list, and he has his pre-combine rankings at NFL.com, and I had to scroll down a bit to get to Peter Woods, who he still thinks will be a plus starter, compares him to Christian Wilkins, but clearly isn't close to one of the top 10 players for Lance Zierlein. Guys like Caleb Banks ahead of Peter Woods, Caden McDonald as well. I'm just naming two different
also Caleb Banks going to be a very interesting guy at the combine for teams and for fans, from a testing point of view for fans and for teams getting those medicals.
And so those two, I think, as far as medicals go, another one is Jermod McCoy, right? And how he interviews and how everything goes with him, the Tennessee Volunteers corner.
Well, his injury was a long time ago, right? Like, he might actually test, and if he tests, that'll be particularly interesting if he's healthy enough to test.
For sure. And if I'm him, wait till your pro day, my man. But if he tests, great. It'd be even better. But all of these guys, like Banks, could certainly be in the mix at 10, but right now a lot of people see him as there's no way the Bengals would take him there. Woods certainly could be in the mix there. And what happens over the next week, whether it's the testing, the interviews, big part of it. Like, I just know the Bengals, especially with Banks, they look at these physical freaks like they did with Amarius Mims, like they did last year with Shamar Stewart. And if they're like, man, this kid works really hard. He was just nicked up last year for Florida, but he's got a heck of a future. He could be in the mix at 10. And that's where that foundation, these interviews, all of those things, they're going to start to be built now. And so we'll see. The medicals are such a unique part of this that make it tough. It make it really tough, especially for us, because we don't always find out. Medicals are good. Medicals aren't good. And I try, but they just have access to so much.
We find out after the fact.
Sure.
When we find out. Nobody wants to tell us anything before the draft. And then after the draft, we start to find
and then you start to hear little things. Yeah. But that's what's tough about right now.
Yeah.
Like, is there something with Peter Woods that NFL teams are concerned about? And that's why because in January, it's much different than now, even in that fall. Well, that he might not have fallen anywhere for NFL teams. Maybe that's just where NFL teams have had him from the jump, and it's not as high. And so, are there any issues with Caleb Downs? You hope not. He was as durable as can be at Ohio State. You couldn't get him off the practice field for the Buckeyes. And so that's the interesting tidbit with all of these guys, especially when it comes to the 10th pick, because let's be honest, the Bengals have to find instant impact there with the 10th overall selection. You do not want to be talking about, honestly, what you're talking about with Shamar Stewart. And I get it. Injury was part of it, but there weren't enough flashes where people think Shamar Stewart was the right pick as of today. He might be the right pick, but fans are obviously skeptical, and he was injured for a big part of the year, so I understand that. but even when he was out there, it's not like things went glowingly. And so you don't want to be in this position with the 10th overall pick a year from now. You need an instant impact type of player.
Yeah, ideally when you're picking 10th, you can get all three of the boxes checked, not just athleticism and whatever. You want to get athleticism, production, age. And they got athleticism, age, and Shamar Stewart. And age has been a big one for the Bengals. They've drafted guys that are 22 or younger for the most part in the first round in recent history. And that, I think, is a fascinating element of the Caleb Banks discussion in particular.
Yeah, that's who I was thinking of. Yep.
The other one that obviously we're going to be watching closely is just how T-Rex arms is Ruben Bain.
Mm-hmm.
Is he a 29-inch arm guy? And you obviously can't draft that before 10. You just have to pick him 10th, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's the rules. But I think watching some of the measurements for some of these guys, just as far as first-round talent goes in particular, Ruben Bain, going to be very interesting. David Bailey's weight, I think, for the Bengals could be interesting. I know they've had interest in some of the smaller edge rushing guys in the last few years, but they've not picked them despite interest that we believe they had in a guy like Nolan Smith, for example.
Yeah.
They didn't end up picking those players who were
pick Miles Murphy right ahead of him. Yeah.
So is there interest in some of these lighter players like David Bailey? And there's a lot of guys like that in this class. TJ Parker, not one of them, but R. Mason Thomas is one of them at 249, according to what we know right now. And Derek Moore, 254, according to what we know right now. So what those guys weigh at and how they test, if they test at whatever they weigh in at, will be interesting. Always interesting to see who does and doesn't test and waits for their pro day, right? Because fewer and fewer players seem to be going through all the drills at the combine or all the tests at the combine, even if they're doing the positional work. But going to be a fun week to see some of these guys going through some of the drills. I remember last year watching the defensive lineman drills and the positional drills, which I don't always watch, but I was watching them live last year, maybe for the first time for that particular position. And I felt like I did learn some things about lower body flexibility or agility for some guys like that. And so some of the stuff that will be interesting will also be the stuff that isn't timed and just the on-field work to see how some of these guys are moving and putting moves together for defensive linemen, because that's really going to be one of the positions that we're most interested in, right? Like Grayson Halton, is he going to go test himself into the second round? Is he going to go test great and make a team really consider him early and push his status up because he goes and tests like a great athlete? I think Kyle Lewis is another really interesting one. Senior Bowl standout, could be a safety, could be a linebacker in the NFL. I'm going to keep mentioning that name because I think he's fascinating. Going to be an interesting one, James. Is there any other position group? I mean, Jeremiah Love, I know you want to talk about Jeremiah Love again.
Well, sure. I mean, Jeremiah Love, Mekhi Lemon, like all of the receivers, especially the mid-round guys, I think that the Bengals will be looking at. Keldrick Falk is going to be one edge-wise that
yeah, we should talk about Keldrick Falk before the last week before the draft.
Yeah. No, I mean, he's one that keep an eye on. It hopefully not Bengals-wise, because there's no way they should take him 10th, but Mesidor, Akeem Mesidor out of Miami, he's just, I mean, he's 24 and yet he's getting some buzz. And so it's just going to be interesting to see how things go with him. But yeah, there are a lot of guys like that I think, honestly, the other safeties, Emmanuel McNeil Warren, is a big one because he's a small school guy. And do the Bengals view him? Do they give him a first round grade? Because it's not just will you take him at 10? It's, will they trade down to 16 and take a Jermod McCoy if he's there, Cade McDonald or Emmanuel McNeil Warren, Caleb Banks? Like that. There's a lot of guys like that, yeah, maybe they get consideration at 10, but they're also could be trade down scenarios as well.
Yep. We'll have you covered this week throughout the combine. We will hear from Duke Tobin and Zac Taylor first, and we'll have some reactions to those couple of press conferences and local media scrums over a couple of days. We'll hear from the coordinators as well this week. And I don't know how much time we will have this week, James, to talk about the player testing. So that might wait until Sunday, and Monday of next week, we'll have our first post-combine mock draft, which is inevitably going to be impacted by the way guys test. It always gets us. The Senior Bowl always gets everybody. And that's always fun every year to see how things change with the various calendar events in the NFL offseason. But until next time, that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.